יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, שא עיני להרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל.
Okay, shalom everybody, shalom. This is Hakham Melech Rahmiel of the World Alliance of Qara'im, and I have with me here Rabbi Asher Meza of Torah, Judaism International, and we are going to have a discussion / debate on the topic of Karaism versus Rabbinical Judaism. And I'll first ask our guest to introduce himself. Asher, would you prefer I call you Asher or Rabbi Meza or something else?
Asher's fine. Asher's fine.
Okay, that works then. Okay, Asher, so go ahead, please introduce yourself.
Sure. So, my name is Rabbi Asher Meza. I teach Torah from an Orthodox perspective. The main difference between what I do and what other Orthodox rabbis do online is that I actually encourage other people to consider looking into Judaism, not necessarily to convert to Judaism right away, but I believe that our job is really to be a Mamlechet Kohanim to the world, and that means bringing people to the understanding that we've acquired of the Transcendent One. I have a website called TorahJudaism.com, and I've been involved in Jewish outreach. Wow, let me see. I've worked for Jeff Seidel for the last 25 years. I started outreach in Jerusalem, in Hebrew U and Tel Aviv University, mainly by Jews for Jews, and then I expanded it to include Gentiles as well. I teach what I'd like to call rational Judaism from a Maimonidean perspective. Not completely Maimonidean, but according to his philosophical framework. And I've been following you for a while. I think we've in some way been chasing this debate for many years. I think even from when I was living in the Shomron. But I myself am a follower of your work.
For a number of years now.
Yes. That we know of each other. I think that you're very well known and respected in the Karaite community. And I think that this is a great opportunity for people to see the actual differences, mysticism aside. And the bulk of the reaction that I think Karaites have towards the rabbinical world is via the mystical. And I'm here to, in some way, give you a different perspective.
Okay, fair enough. I'll give a bit of introduction about myself. My name is Melech Rahmiel of Karaite Insights and the World Alliance of Qara'im. I've been involved in Karaism and Torah Judaism for, I guess about 35 years now. Charism for about 25 years now, and I grew up as in a conservative Jewish family in the suburbs of New York. Was dragged against my will to conservative Jewish synagogue. Didn't think much of it, and as a teenager, just kind of went my own way. Eventually, through a lot of circumstances, I eventually found my way back to Judaism, and then soon after moved to Israel, where I learned in rabbinical yeshivas for about 10 years. And during that time, I became, well, actually from the very beginning, I was very disillusioned with rabbinical Judaism, but I didn't know enough to be able to question it. I felt something was a bit off, but who was I to say? I was brand new to the whole game of Judaism, basically, aside from whatever my upbringing was in the conservative Jewish community. And so I didn't really feel that I had the right or the ability to question it. And throughout the 1990s, that desire to question it grew stronger and stronger. At a certain point, a very close friend of mine encouraged me to read the Tanakh in Hebrew without any commentary and just try to understand it for what it is. And I think that was a turning point for me. I became absolutely addicted to reading the Tanakh in Hebrew. It was something that spoke to me directly. It was something that I felt was a direct message to the people of Israel, very understandable, not by our generation because we're so disconnected and separated from biblical Hebrew, from the societal, the social context, the historical context of the Tanakh, but certainly very understandable by ancient Israelites. And that really was the beginning of my quest to try, first and foremost, to understand how the Torah and the Tanakh were understood by ancient Israel, the population to which those words were directed. And to take that as a starting point for where we are now, we're at a very special point in our journey as the nation of Israel. We have, last count, is it 7 million Jews that now live in the land of Israel? Perhaps it's more at this point. We are returning to our land. I live in the land of Israel. Oh, I don't know what happened to Asher. I guess he'll come back in a second. We are returning to the land of Israel. I personally live. Asher, you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry, I got a phone call.
Okay, I don't know what happened there. I live in the land of Israel in the Golan Heights. It's absolutely beautiful up here, and fulfilling, I won't say the dream because it's not always easy. Sometimes it's a dream, sometimes it's a nightmare. As Asher well knows, he lived in the Shomron, in Samaria, but it is definitely a very fulfilling aspect of living as a Jewish life. So I would say that there will probably be, as we have this discussion, many things that we agree upon, such as the divinity of the Torah, the divinity of the Tanakh, the truth of the words of the prophets, and so on. And there will probably be some major points that we disagree on, and I'm sure we'll get to those as well. I hope the debate is going to stay friendly and constructive, and I think it will. And let's get started. Asher, go ahead. Why don't you start?
Sure.
Perhaps.
Okay, so I think the biggest point of contention regarding what I believe and the average Orthodox Jew believes regarding the oral law is, where did it come from? And essentially, what do we consider the oral law? Those are the main 2 points that really drive a wedge between, I would say, the Rambamist Maimonidean understanding of what we call the oral law and what Kabbalists call the oral law. So like from that perspective, I teach that if we didn't have an oral law, we'd have to create one because there's no way for Israel to move forward without consensus. And this is putting aside notions that it was all given to us on Mount Sinai, putting aside the notion that some incorrectly say that it's more important than the written law. I've spoken to many Karaites, including Nehemiah Gordon, who essentially concluded that if the early rabbis were Maimonidean, they would probably still be Orthodox. The problem is it's a very minute opinion in mainstream Judaism, and from a rationalist perspective, we think that the whole notion has been hijacked by mystics, which correctly so gives people a bad taste in their mouth regarding the notion of the oral law. What do you think about that?
Well, if I can respond, to cut straight to the point, certainly mysticism is a huge problem in Judaism. It's worked its way into Judaism for centuries. Probably most of the modern version of mysticism that we find in Judaism can be traced back to the 10th, 11th, 12th century, specifically in the Iberian Peninsula, where Islam, Christianity, and Judaism all met, in Spain mostly, also somewhat in Portugal. And that was due to the Moors' invasion of the Iberian Peninsula in the year 711, and they were finally kicked out of the Iberian Peninsula with the Treaty of Granada in 1492. So during that time, when Sufism mixed with Christian mysticism and mixed with the Jewish presence on the Iberian Peninsula, certainly there was a lot of transfer of these mystical ideas, and that did eventually result in the writing of the Zohar by Moshe de Leon in Leon, Spain, in the year, I believe it was 1290, thereabouts. So I agree with you on that. However, I disagree with you on the other point. While I can't claim to be an expert in the Rambam, I have studied a bunch of his stuff, and I actually find his attempt to, shall we say, make the oral law logical or rational, I find it, I want to use the correct word here, maybe the word offensive is too strong, but I find it disconcerting that he does so, because I think essentially what he is doing, he's a very smart guy, a super smart dude, right? We all know that the Rambam is obviously very intelligent, and his approach towards halacha and philosophy is very consistent. And in a sense, I think that is what makes his approach dangerous, if I could use that word, or problematic. Because essentially what he does is what's that?
Or effective.
Effective, exactly. There you go. It is very effective, and that for me is a problem, because in my eyes, the Rambam is essentially an apologist for the oral law. He takes something that is ultimately, I would say, irrational, something that is in its sources comes from foreign philosophies, whether it's Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrian Persian philosophy back in the days of Hillel and Shammai, whether it's Greek philosophy during the Seleucid control of the land of Israel and the surrounding areas, whether it's during the Second Temple period, the middle Second Temple period, around the time of the Hanukkah story, etc., whether it's Roman philosophy, and so on. He attempts to take all of these, what I would consider foreign ideas, foreign concepts that made their way into Judaism, and attempt to give them a coherent, rational framework. So it's interesting, actually, that on the very point that you say that many people, including other Karaites, would have remained Orthodox Jews if that rationalist form, if that Rambamic form, that Maimonidean form of Judaism had taken hold, I would actually disagree with that, and I would say that that nonetheless I would still remain a Karaite.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now what's your biggest objection to Maimonides' understanding of the oral law? Now, when I say that I'm a Maimonidean, by the way, I don't hold by everything that he teaches. However, I'm talking about his philosophical framework as it relates to the oral law. And there's still discrepancy to that. There were rabbis that existed before that also gave their rendition. It didn't really deviate much from the Rambam, the Geonim in particular. What's your biggest issue with what people call the oral law today?
My biggest issue with the oral law if I could put it in very simple terms, is that the nation of Israel, from the time of the giving of the Torah, which is dated approximately, I believe, to around 1200 BCE, until the mid-Second Temple period, so approximately 1,000 years, Israel, the nation of Israel, kept a certain form of Torah, which was very, I don't want to use the word simple, which was very straightforward and which was very consistent. We see this throughout the writings of the Tanakh, a book which spans, again, about 1,000 years of Israelite history. And in the Tanakh, we don't see any, not a single element of what would be considered some of the basic and central tenets of the oral law, such as, for instance, tefillin is perhaps an excellent example. Separation of meat and milk, although maybe that's a bit of a loaded issue. The keeping of the holidays that were promoted by the rabbis, such as so-called Rosh Hashanah, such as the belief that Shavuot represents the Chag Matan Torah, the festival celebrating the giving of the Torah, when in fact in the Torah, it's a first fruits holiday for the wheat harvest, and many other examples. We just don't see anything that is now considered normative Judaism. Obviously, there's going to be some overlap between normative Judaism and Tanakhic Judaism, but the vast majority, or a huge portion of what would be considered normative rabbinical Judaism based on the so-called oral law, we don't see any evidence of that whatsoever in the 1,000 years that Israel kept the Torah, or was supposed to keep the Torah, from 1200 BCE to until approximately 200 BCE. So that's my main objection. To put it in very simple terms, the oral law, in my opinion, is imported ideas, philosophies, and foreign imported ideas and philosophies that made their way into Jewish communities, specifically the ones living in Babylon, Persia at the time, and those living in the land of Israel, and they poisoned, for lack of a better word, or inserted their foreign influences into the modes of thought of the nation of Israel, and also that resulted in a very specific or a very significant change in the way that the nation of Israel understood and kept the laws of the Torah. So that's my objection.
Mm-hmm. So the basis of what we call the oral law, and I hate using that term oral law, is Deuteronomy chapter 17. That's the main verse we use. Although there's other verses that allude to this, like in Numbers, when God tells Moses to establish a court of 70 elders. It shows that the building blocks for that consensus, they were being laid. Now, when you say that there is no evidence in Tanakh itself or Torah itself for what we call the oral law, it depends, again, what you call the oral law. If it's consensus, I mean, Second Chronicles elucidates the idea that there was a court, and the job of this court was to interpret mitzvot, to in some way expand or to explain what Deuteronomy chapter 17 first laid down, that in all areas of dispute, that you shall go to the place that God will choose. That later became known as the Lishkat HaGazit, and they will essentially give you the ruling, the verdict, the law, in all areas of dispute. Now, there are some things that are strictly rabbinic, at least like from a Maimonidean perspective, that we wouldn't consider with any hint of the divine. As a matter of fact, I have no issue, and there are many people who believe in what is later called the oral law, having no issue that these laws were specifically developed by the Sanhedrin, and that the reason we feel bound to keep them is not because of the Medrash that teaches that they were given on Mount Sinai, but because God tells us not to stray from the right or to the left of what this court instructs. Now, granted, even though it's sanctioned by God, i.e. the existence of this court, it's still essentially rabbinic. That means the rabbinic always takes a back row seat in terms of how we commune with God, always. Now, I know there's many rabbis that misrepresent that. I call that the big dumbification of Judaism, that they'll even tell you that you can't even understand the Torah without commentaries, and commentaries, even from a rabbinic perspective, have nothing to do with the oral law, right? And I call this a dumbification of Judaism because it's just easier to teach in that way, and it's easier to justify foreign ideas that I believe later crept in with Kabbalistic movements, in particular Lurianic Kabbalah, than to actually dissect or give some sort of systematic theology to how halakha actually works. And so I have no issue assuming that the way tefillin are made, the mixing of meat and milk, are all later rabbinic developments instituted by the Sanhedrin to help us illustrate specific statements in the Torah. Now, the bigger question is, why do people always focus on such trivial matters and skip the more important ones that really focus on the fact that we couldn't live practical Judaism from a national perspective, ceremonial Judaism in particular from a national perspective, without some consensus on how we're going to keep these laws to help us progress and compete nationally with other kingdoms in the world? Because, whether you wear tefillin or not is not going to change whether we keep Pesach in the same month of the year or the same time of the year, right? I don't know why Karaites always focus on trivial matters instead of the more weightier ones that are tied to, let's say, keeping Shabbat with consensus on the same page.
We can focus on Shabbat as well.
Sure. So,
all right, Asher,
are those the best examples you have? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just gave those as examples that typically people focus on, as you mentioned. I'm willing to discuss it on many different levels. We could talk about Shabbat, we could talk about the holidays, we could talk about the calendar, we could talk about whatever issue you wish. But let me unpack a number of the things that you said there. Okay, you said a lot. Let's first talk about consensus. Okay, consensus is, of course, important. But it's not, I guess the question is consensus for what? We know that there are times in the history of Israel that a large portion of the nation of Israel had turned to worship of foreign gods and had gone away from the Torah, had done some very horrible things, murder, adultery, etc. If we'd asked the consensus of the people back then what should be done, then they would not. It would not be consensus that we, as Torah observant Israelites, would wish to follow. My point is, and maybe that's just kind of an illustrated example. My point is that consensus is not the be all and the end all of what we should do as the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel, as it was originally conceived, is not a nation based on consensus. It's a nation based on top-down administration, starting with, first and foremost, I'll spare you because I know your audience is not used to hearing the explicit name of God, but starting first and foremost with Hashem himself. We see that in the Torah in a number of examples. For instance, when Moshe goes to God to find out how to adjudicate regarding the daughters of Salafchad, the Mikoshet Eitzim, the gatherer of wood on the Shabbat, the blasphemer of the name, etc. Below God is not a panel of judges. The idea of a panel of judges or a Sanhedrin, which actually comes from the Greek word synhedrion, which means to sit together. It's basically a tribune or a tribunal. This is not an Israelite or a Jewish idea at all. This is actually a Greek idea. It's a Greek democratic idea. So below, we see originally that below God himself was Moses. Moses was the final arbiter or the final adjudicator of cases that were brought before or that needed to be solved. Now, below him, of course, were the hierarchy of judges. But if those cases cannot be solved, then it was eventually brought to Moses, and later on, and we'll get to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 9, which is what we were speaking about before. And Moses did not judge by consensus. He didn't judge by tribunal. He judged as a single judge. And this is what we see throughout the Tanakh. We don't have any example that I can think of, certainly not in the period of the Judges, as we find in the book of Judges, certainly not during the period of the Kings, as we find in the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, and the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. We don't have any example or any situation at all where there's judge by tribunal. That's not a Jewish idea. That's not an Israelite idea. That's a foreign idea. So, for instance, when Samuel, the final judge before the switch over to the period of the kings, is judging cases or is making decisions, he's doing it alone. When Moses is making decisions, he's doing it alone. When Devorah, who sat under the palm tree of Devorah, judging the people, judging the nation in the book of Judges that spoken about, she judged the nation alone. She was the top judge. And we see this even as it's extended into the period of the kings. In the period of the kings, you do have a loss of prophecy by the kings. Now that role is separated, whereas all the judges or most of the judges were actual prophets. The kings are not themselves prophets, but they have at their side a prophet, right? So for instance, Shaul had Samuel, had Shmuel, David had Shmuel, and then Nathan. So, but we see also that it's the king who judges. One of the first things that's written about that is written about in the first book of Kings is when Solomon gains reign over the nation, or gets reign over the nation after his battle with Adoniyahu, who attempted to take over from David, from his father David. The first thing he does, the first thing that's mentioned that he does, is that he sits down and he judges the nation. And we have the famous case where the two prostitutes come to Solomon, each claiming that the baby that had died is the other one's and the live baby is theirs. And the first thing that Solomon does as a public figure, as a king, is judge that case, right? He doesn't do it by tribunal. He doesn't do it by group. He doesn't do it by consensus. He does it through his own wisdom, his own contemplation, and his own way of adjudicating the case. And if we now take that, well, even before we go to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 9, if we now speak about the Sanhedrin explicitly was set up. There were perhaps early tribunals set up by one of the later Hashmonean kings, Alexander Yanai, they say. But the first real mention of the Sanhedrin is a body that's set up by the Romans. It's set up by the Roman governor of Syria, Aulus Gabinius, in I believe around the year 60 BCE, not long after the Romans came in and took over the land of Israel, at the behest of the Pharisees, by the way, but we won't get into that right now. And that is when we switched over from 1,000 years of rule, I won't say rule, of judgment by a single judge at the top of the hierarchy, to judgment by a tribunal, by a Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin and judgment by tribunal, once again, is a completely foreign idea to the Torah, and we don't see any evidence of it, not that I can think of. If you could bring something, then I'm happy to listen to it, in the 1,000 years from 1200 BCE until approximately 200 BCE. Just very quickly, and then I'll turn it back over to you. Regarding Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 9, and I'll just bring it up for a second. I'll just read it. I'm not going to share the screen or anything like that. Let me see if I can find it here. 1 second, please. Here. So Deuteronomy 17:9, if we read the specific words, we also see that it's speaking about a single judge at the top of the hierarchy. It's not speaking in any way, shape, or form about a panel of judges. And I'll just read the English to save us time here. But here, Deuteronomy 17:9. If cases before your courts are too difficult for you to judge, whether bloodshed, this is the NIV translation, by the way, not my own, lawsuits or assaults, take them to the place the Lord your God will choose. Go to the Levitical priests or to the judge who is in office at that time. Inquire of them, meaning one of the Levitical priests, who ostensibly would be adjudicating things more related to their area of expertise, would be purity versus impurity, the rules of the sacrifices, etc. And to the judge who is in office at that time. Inquire of them, and they will give you the verdict, and et cetera, et cetera. You must listen to the decision. So we see that here, Deuteronomy 17:9, and if we go to the Hebrew, it will say Hashofet, the judge. It doesn't say anything about judges or a panel of judges or anything along those lines. There was a single judge at the top of the hierarchy. That's not only explicit in Deuteronomy 17:9, but that plays itself out in the books of the Tanakh, where we actually see how Israel lived its life for 1,000 years. Again, the book of Judges, the first and second books of Samuel, and the book of Kings. There's no such thing as a tribunal. All right, Asher,
Okay.
turn it back over to you.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to show that I'm not sure how you missed these verses. The notion of consensus, both in Deuteronomy, repeated in Second Chronicles. So now it's true, the word Sanhedrin may not appear, but the notion of the Zakanim, Shoftim, later the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, and then eventually Sanhedrin was always pointing to the same authority that was connected directly to the 70 elders that Moses himself established. Now it's true, it says the judge, right? It says the Shofet, but it also says the Cohen. It talks about Levium. And then it mentions them in plural regarding judges in Second Chronicles. So
can you point to that verse?
Yes. All right. So let's start with Deuteronomy, and then we'll move over to Second Chronicles. Okay. So
sure.
I'm on Machon Mamre.
Sure.
It starts off if there arise a matter too hard for thee in judgment, between blood and blood, between plea and plea, between stroke and stroke, even matters of controversy within thy gates, right? Then you shall rise and go to the place that God will choose, and you shall go to who? It says Leviim, Kohanim, right? So this is plural, right? And then it says the Shofet, right? So now it seems like this is more than one person. And even the way Rabbinic Judaism has always understood it is that the Cohen was the leader of the court, just like Moses made up the 71st member, right? The Cohen was always the leader of the court till the Kohanim became corrupted, and then they relegated that role to a descendant of David. So the notion of there not being a court, granted, not by the term Sanhedrin, because that's not there, but the notion of consensus was there. Now, if you go to Second Chronicles, hold on 1 second. See, I don't think I have it up. 1 second.
Okay.
1 second.
Yep, take your time, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So Second Chronicles is going to reiterate this. So it says in 19 verse 8, it says that Jehoshaphat...
Second Chronicles chapter 19 verse 8. Okay. I'm just going to bring it up for myself.
Yes. Okay, go ahead. So here, it reiterates Leviim, Kohanim, and then it says the heads of the houses of Israel. So this is not one person. Now, no one is denying that the king also judged. There was a later edict that we couldn't adjudicate the king, but only because the king judged, and the priests, the Levium, and the prophets. I mean, Maimonides brings down, according to rabbinic literature, that every prophet had his own Beit Din. Now, whether that's verifiable or not, the notion of consensus was always there. And to the point that in Parshat Shoftim, it goes on further and it says that if you disagree with the ruling of this court, right, these individuals, we have a mitzvah to burn them away from Israel. It says that you shall burn the evil from amongst your midst. So the singularity that when it comes to the final din is not there. Now, in Chronicles, it specifically expands it, or, like in my opinion, interprets it for mitzvot, hukim, and mishpatim, to explain them. And this is what the Rambam writes in his Akdama to Mishnah Torah. He says, Zohar Perusha, that Torah Sheba'al Peh is essentially the interpretation of mitzvot. Now, granted, the bulk of what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh is not just the translation of mitzvot. I mean, that would be limited to what we call Midrashei Halacha. The bulk of what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh today is Midrashei Agada, just because there's a big demonification in Judaism. So the notion that there's a singularity in the judicial system did not exist from a Torah perspective. Now, like if you want to focus on these verses and tell me how in any way did I misrepresent them, is there not like a plural essence
Yep.
to the court system? And you're saying that courts didn't rule by vote? I mean, that's the whole basis of the court. The reason you need more than one judge
Go ahead.
it is in order like to give a balanced representation regarding any law that you're trying to elucidate. So I'm not really sure what your premise is.
That's a Greek democratic. That's a
No, I
Greek
understand.
democratic idea. But go on.
So how do we interpret the notion of a Beit Din, or later what became known as the Beit Din Hagadol or Beit Din Katana? I mean, it's a body of individuals. Like, don't forget, like Moshe Rabbeinu and the Zekanim adjudicated in front of the tent of meeting, what later became known as the Lishkat Hagazit, because of consensus. If not, it would have fell solely on Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, again, we have to make a distinction between man-made laws, right, Gezeirus Takanas, and laws that, I guess, specific rabbis in any given time felt so passionately about, that said possibly this law may have come from some divine source, what the Mishnah later calls Halach LaMoshe Misinai. But that's not the same as, let's say, like a Chabadnik believing that the whole body of rabbinic literature was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. And I think that is what gave birth to Karaite Judaism.
Okay. All right. I'll respond to a number of points. Let's start with the verses that you brought in 2 Chronicles chapter 19. So I'll read again just to save time. I won't go to the Hebrew unless we need to, but I'll just read it in the English. It's the NIV translation. So you mentioned 2 Chronicles chapter 19, verse 8, and I'll start reading from there for a couple of verses. It says, "In Jerusalem also, Jehoshaphat appointed some of the Levites, priests, and heads of Israelite families to administer the law of the Lord and to settle disputes, and they lived in Jerusalem. He gave them these orders," and I think this is the key part coming up: "You must serve faithfully and wholeheartedly in the fear of the Lord in every case that comes before you from your people who live in the cities. Whether bloodshed or other concerns of the law, commands, decrees, or regulations, you are to warn them not to sin against the Lord," etc. So this is kind of a rehashing. These verses are rehashing of Deuteronomy chapter 17:9. And the key here is that, yes, these were appointed, but not as a body of judges. The key here is that these were appointed for the people who live in the cities, just as we see in chapter 17:9. There's not a body or tribunal of judges. There's a hierarchy of judges. And that's exactly what we also see in Exodus chapter 18, when Jethro comes to Moshe and gives him advice on how to administer law or how to adjudicate cases. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, but there's no implication here, and neither in 2 Chronicles chapter 19, nor in Deuteronomy chapter 17, that we're talking about a tribunal. We're talking about a hierarchy of judges. We're talking about judges, local judges that are placed in the cities, within your gates, as it says in Deuteronomy 17:9, a reference to the meeting place in the city, the central square of the city. And in 2 Chronicles 19, that's just a reiteration, essentially of Deuteronomy chapter 17. So the way that the Torah envisions adjudication of law is a hierarchy of judges, not a tribunal of judges. Regarding Deuteronomy chapter 17, if we go back to the original halakha, if we do look at it in the Hebrew, okay, we could see. So first of all, let's look at really the key verses, Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 9, right? And it says, "Vata el hakohanim haleviim." So you shall come to and that doesn't mean the Kohanim and the Levites. That means, that's usually translated by most translators, including some that I respect very much, as the Levitical Kohanim, so the Levitical priests. So it's speaking about the Kohanim. So you shall come to the Kohanim, ve'el hashofet, and to the judge, asher yeh b'yamim hahem, that will be in those days, etc. And then you will ask for them to adjudicate the case. Okay. So we first of all, we see that it says el hashofet. So it is speaking about a single judge, shofet. Okay. So why does it say the Levitical priests, hakohanim haleviim, in the plural? That's because in the court, or in the tabernacle / temple, there were many Kohanim. It wasn't just a single Kohen. There was the Kohen Gadol, but there were also many Kohanim. So the implication there, in my opinion, is that you would take the case, if it's a case that can be adjudicated by one of the Kohanim, such as, again, matters of, let's say, purity versus impurity, matters of the laws of sacrifices, anything that would be in the realm of the expertise of the Kohanim, then that case would go to one of those Kohanim. And if it had something to do with more like criminal law, tort law, etc., then it would go to the shofet. It would go to the shofet. But again, this was only after the case could not be adjudicated in the cities, right?
What is your opinion so far?
Verse 8.
I'm saying, I mean, so far it's your opinion. You're saying clearly,
I would say,
you know, like you're reading into it. It seems like you yourself need like some sort of consensus on how to understand this verse, lest Israel split 8 different ways. But go ahead.
I don't think it's my opinion. Obviously, it's I'm giving my understanding and my interpretation, but I don't think I'm straying from what.
No, but the plurality is there. That's the thing. Like, and you're in some way trying to make it fit into the one judge, which destroys the whole notion of consensus to begin with. The whole notion of God telling Moses to establish 70 elders, right? For the elders of their tribe, and that God's going to put on them what he put on Moses himself. Like the notion of consensus, of like valuing different opinion to come to some understanding and how we're going to keep at least ceremonial law is all over the place. The idea that only the king, right? Like every king, every generation in some way reinvented the law. Israel could not function in a uniform manner if that was the case.
Well, first of all, I'm not saying that that every king and every judge reinvented the law. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that there was no reason for them to reinvent the law because the law was pretty straightforward and clear to the ancient Israelites. The role of the judge and the role of the Kohen specifically in, I mean, the Kohen has many roles, but the role of the Kohen is specifically in Deuteronomy 17:9 is not to interpret law, it's to adjudicate cases. So again, maybe the classic example is what Solomon did when the 2 prostitutes came to him, or any other law that needs to be adjudicated. Okay, Shimon says that he owns the sheep, and Levi says that he owns the sheep, etc. Right? This is adjudication of law. This is not legislation of new law. There was no need to legislate new law because the law was.
You just said that Second Chronicles. So, like you just said that Second Chronicles explains what Deuteronomy chapter 17 was trying to say, and it specifically says interpreting law. It says hukim mishpatim, right? I mean, it says mitzvot.
Well, which verse?
Look, it says statutes and judgments. You know, like the decrees. It says
oh, I see.
10.
Verse 10.
10. Yes.
Okay.
It says between Torah and commandments, statutes and judgments.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the job of this court to in some way build consensus around, in my opinion, clearly ceremonial law. I am against mystically inclined Orthodox Jews in some way telling us that we can relate to God unless we do it via the rabbinic. I think that's absurd. I think that the notion of what we call oral law is there only to explain the ceremonial. As a matter of fact, the Rambam's perspective is that the court had no authority in the metaphysical, right? I mean, they can't vote that whether God has feet or not. However, in terms of how we keep what we call halakha lemaseh, how do you keep Shabbat, how do you keep the Yom Kippur, right? There had to be some consensus, or then you could not function as a nation, especially when there's a death penalty connected to breaking ceremonies like Shabbat. There had to be some consensus on how to keep Shabbat in order for the court to even adjudicate anyone. It for sure was not built off of intuition. Here, for example, how would you establish?
No, it definitely was not. It was definitely not built off intuition during the time of the prophets, during the time of the Tanakh. It was very consistent throughout.
The Tanakh can add to the Torah, so it seems that everything that you believe in terms of authority, right? I mean, lo tosef alav, right? That has to come like from the Chumash itself, and then it seems like the prophets are there to in some way amplify the Chumash. So how would you establish?
You're misunderstanding. If I could just interrupt for 1 second, you're misunderstanding me. If you think I'm saying that the rest of the Tanakh is adding new law, what I'm saying is that we have what the Tanakh does is it provides a chronicle of life in Israel for a period of approximately 1,000 years. So it doesn't add new law. We could see by looking at the Tanakh the way Israel understood and kept the law. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's very consistent from the earliest books of the Tanakh, from all the way from the Chumash itself, from Joshua straight through to the final books of the Tanakh, whether it's Ezra and Nehemiah or even the final prophets such as Malachi. It's very.
So how would you establish, let's say, Rosh Chodesh?
We don't see how would I establish Rosh Chodesh?
Right. I mean, nowhere in the Chumash does it tell you how to establish a month.
We don't need to. It's embedded in the meaning of the word Chodesh or Rosh Chodesh. It comes from the word Chadash.
Yes, Chadash. That has nothing to do. That has nothing. I mean, Chodesh or Chadash has nothing to do with the moon.
Of course it does, because Chodesh is another word for Chodesh.
After the fact.
Or Yerach. What's that?
Yeah. Yerach means moon.
It's clear that
Chodesh comes from Chadash or renewal.
Yes, but it's of the moon, because sometimes the months are referred to as Yerach or Yereach, which means the moon.
No, so in the Torah itself. In the Torah itself, like not using the prophets and essentially like what the rabbis canonized, according to the Chumash itself, how could you establish a month with, in some way, obligating all the Israelites listening to, celebrate Pesach or Rosh Hashanah on the same day if you didn't have consensus by the elders?
Why do you need consensus? I don't understand why you would need some kind of consensus.
Okay, so like if there's a punishment, well, but there's some individuals. I'm not gonna.
No, I understand. Let's say there's a punishment for not keeping the holidays on the right days, which, by the way, is one of my big criticisms of the rabbis, that they do not keep the holidays on the right days. But let's say there is a punishment. How does that imply that you need some kind of consensus? It doesn't necessarily need to be consensus. It could be that the head judge determined.
Well,
that all of Israel went out, saw the new moon, and then the head judge then declared the holidays, for instance, are most of them called Mikra Kodesh. It's a declaration.
I get that, but that's after the fact. That's after there was consensus of needing to spot a new moon. Where in the Torah does it say to spot the new moon? Nowhere. It says that you shall establish a month, meaning the judges. The judges establish the whole process of Rosh Chodesh. The whole notion, and I believe that you're.
The meaning of Rosh Chodesh is the meaning of Rosh Chodesh is built into the meaning of the word. It means
but how?
Moon.
No, it doesn't mean. That's only after the fact. The word Chadash, has nothing to do with moon. It just means new. In this context, it means renewal.
Not the word Chadash. The word Chodesh. What does the word Chodesh mean?
It means renewal.
What could it possibly have?
It's not connected to Yereach.
Renewal of what?
I can tell you that.
It's connected to the word Yereach, first of all.
No, it's not connected. It's not linguistically connected to the word Yereach.
No, not linguistically. It's in parallelism. There are some times where a month is called a Yerach or Yereach, which
after the fact.
It's not only that.
But that's not in the Torah. That's a thing.
In the Tanakh. In the Tanakh.
Okay.
So we understood, but we don't even need. But Asher, we don't even need to go that far. Okay. Because it was understood by ancient Israel. How do we understand?
Because of consensus. That's the only way we understand it. Not based off intuition.
No, it's not consensus.
There was no.
We're not talking about intuition. We're talking about. Let me just respond for 1 second, and then I'll let you.
Go ahead.
We're talking about trying to understand how ancient Israelites understood specific words, specific concepts, etc. Okay. If you could come up with, or scholars could come up with another meaning for the word Chodesh, please, Vakasha, then bring it. But I haven't seen any scholar, whether secular or religious, come up with some other meaning of the word Chodesh. You can say that about any word in the Tanakh or any word in the Torah. How do we know the meaning of any of these words? And then
you're speaking after the fact. Now, colloquially, Chodesh means new, like Rosh Chodesh means the new month. Okay, colloquially, after Jewish history told us this Jewish fact. However, from a Torah perspective, and that's like my whole premise here, is that you couldn't conclude this level of consensus unless this ruling body that God specifically said he gave authority to, the same authority he gave Moses, i.e. the authority to judge, ruled it into existence. There's no way,
so you're saying
for us.
Saying that the Sanhedrin said that the word chodesh means month?
No. Establishing.
That's actually what you're saying.
No.
Well,
Establishing
how did the
the
ancient
month.
Israelites?
Okay.
How did the
So-
ancient Israelites know that the word chodesh meant new month? You're saying it's by consensus of judges?
Correct.
The consensus of judges.
So
came-
in the
wait,
Torah
let me-
itself.
Let me.
Sure.
Wait. Let me just finish the point. So what you're saying essentially is that nobody in ancient Israel knew what the word chodesh meant, except it just meant new thing, something new, a renewal of some sort. And then along came the Sanhedrin, led by Moshe Rabbeinu and a whole bunch of elders, and they said, "Oh, we now determine the fact that the word chodesh means the new month." That's what you're saying, and that's
So no. What I'm saying is that God told them that they shall establish the month. They shall sanctify this renewal. It doesn't say that it's done through the moon. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that we go strictly by the moon. It mentions luminaries. It could be the stars, the moon, the sun. However, the only reason you feel confident enough to keep Pesach when we keep it, right? Rabbinic calendar aside, well, let's imagine like we lived before Hillel Bet.
Okay.
Hold on, like before Hillel Bet. The only reason that you felt there was this level of consensus is because the Sanhedrin came to this conclusion. Anything else would be considered adding to the Torah. Now, you think only because it appears in Nach that it was in their theology, right? In the Torah, that's a leap of faith. And this is just one example that there is no way to live out ceremonial Judaism without the consensus of the judges. I think that your conclusion that it must have been part of man's intuition that we spot the sliver of the new month, we interrogate the witnesses, and as a matter of fact, even lighting bonfires and before that, sending people on horseback, all this was developed by the court. There is no way for Israel to move forward in a uniform manner, and I'm not talking about modern Israel, I mean biblical, the people of God to move forward in a uniform manner if there wasn't consensus. And I think that that's not a hard pill to swallow. The issue that Karaite Judaism has is the rise of irrational Judaism, saying that even the words of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that were given in Har Sinai, everything was given in Har Sinai. Even things that we don't have today were given in Har Sinai. That's absurd, right? And I share the same frustration, right? Even the notion oral law, the phrase oral law doesn't appear in the Mishnah. It doesn't appear in Talmud Yerushalmi. It was invented in Talmud Bavli. Now, we have the notion of halach l'Moshe Misinai. The Rambam says that's about 30 laws, right? And then they whittle it down, because the Mishnah itself says these are just things where there's no machloket, okay? But even that is a bit satirical. All this is tied to the notion that we have a command of lo tasur, or not straying from the right or to the left of what this court instructs. A man-made court that itself made errors, right? I mean, there's a whole tractate in the Talmud called Masechet Torayot that deals with the errors of the Sanhedrin. So that itself, they should destroy 80% of the Karaite claim that we are in some way adding to the Torah. If they acknowledge they can make errors, it's a man-made court, but it's sanctioned by the Torah. That's the difference.
Okay. Again, if I could respond and get back to the original point, first of all, just to reiterate, my problem with rabbinical Judaism is not mysticism. My problem with rabbinical Judaism, as I said in my opening statement, is just as much rationalism, Rambamic or Maimonidean rationalism, as it is mysticism. In fact, I think, as I mentioned, that Maimonidean and rationalism and the like and similar approaches towards Torah are actually more dangerous than mysticism, because mysticism can easily, by at least some percentage of the population, can be picked out or identified as bizarre, to say the least. Okay, whereas a rationalistic approach towards the quote unquote oral law or towards rabbinical Judaism, it's kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing. It masquerades as logic. It masquerades as a coherent system. It is a coherent system, but it's not a coherent system with an anchor in actual Torah/Tanakhic Judaism. Okay, so that's my first point. So if you want to argue that the problem, or that the popularity or the increasing popularity of charism is a rejection of mystical elements of Judaism, you can argue that, but with somebody else, I guess, because that's not my point at all. I see charism, or I see true Torah as much a rejection as Maimonidean rationalist Judaism as it is a rejection of mysticism. That's the first point. Mm-hmm. Getting back to, once again, the point regarding the Chodesh, or the new moon, you've presented a vision, or you presented an illustration of many elements of declaring the new month, which do not need to be present. We don't necessarily need bonfires. We don't necessarily need horse riders on horseback. We don't know, or I can't think of any places in the Tanakh that say explicitly how the news of the new moon was transmitted in ancient times. We do know that at that time it was the Jewish community, or the Israelite community, was only in the land of Israel. So whatever it was, it would have been much easier to do. Whereas in the time when it's written down in I guess that would be Masechet Rosh Hashanah of the Mishnah, how the news of the new moon was transmitted, then already that's speaking about Jewish communities that were already spread out in Babylon, later in Persia, perhaps already up in as far as Greece and Rome. I'm not sure exactly how far it went, but there's nothing. That's just technique, right? Now we have the internet, so we don't need bonfires, and we don't need horses on horseback, right? Right. So that's secondary. That's just technique. Okay. Wait. But let me just make the main point. Okay. Getting back to the main point, which the Torah does speak about. Okay, which is, and I think you're referring specifically to. You're referring specifically to Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, and I'll just bring this up. So this is let me just bring that for 1 second here. Okay. So, and I'll read it in the Hebrew. Okay, so your point is an old rabbinical point that I used to hear all the time in yeshiva. Exodus 12:2, maybe I should read it in the Hebrew because it's a short verse, and I'll translate into the English. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Well, I'm sorry, that's verse 1. Verse 2 is, I get that verse 2. Okay. Chodesh hazeh lechem rosh chodeshim. This month, speaking about the month of the Aviv, shall be for you rosh chodeshim, the head of the month. So shonu lechem lechodshei hashana. It's the first to you. It's the first of the months of the year. So what you're focusing on here is the word lechem, which appears twice in Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, which means to you. So if I translate it to the English, this month shall be for you the head of the months. It is the first for you among the months of the year. And what you're doing is picking up on an old rabbinical polemic that because it says for you or to you or for you or to you, lachem, twice, that means that this now is throwing the declaration of the new moon into the hands of Israel, specifically at the hands of what you would call the Sanhedrin. Okay, but that's not what this means at all. The word lachem, that's a polemic, or that's an extrapolation of.
The premise of my argument is chodesh doesn't mean month. So like you're assuming it means month when you just acknowledge that 2 Chronicles chapter 9 specifically says, it says bein Torah lemitzvah lechukim ule mishpatim. So if it's specifically telling you here that they're going to help you adjudicate between mitzvot, isn't this one of the most important mitzvot? Because you can't even properly keep Shabbos. There's a group now called the Lunar Sabbath that they keep the Sabbath on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday, right? If they don't have the consensus on how to establish a month, okay, you can't keep any of the heavier ceremonial laws. So if it's telling you here that they're in charge of interpreting mitzvot, isn't this one of the more important mitzvot that you're going to rely that human intuition will do a good enough job?
Not at all.
Here, look, the Jewish people have a hard time agreeing on anything. Okay, so you're telling me the Jewish people concluded
it's not saying that. It's not saying that. It's not saying
that Chodesh means month. What? I'm sorry. I mean, it specifically says
because it doesn't. But I'll get to that in a second. If you want, we can look into it in the Hebrew there. Okay, but the word Chodesh means month because that's the way the ancient Israelites understood it. How do we understand any biblical?
The court understood it, essentially.
What's that? No, not
the
because the court instituted it. Because so
it's intuition.
We can understand.
So it's either intuition, or the court.
No, it's not intuition. It's not the court. It's a matter of understanding a language. How is any ancient language understood? How do you
get Yerach from Chodesh? You don't.
What's that?
You don't get
You
Yoreach
don't.
from
I'm not
Chodesh
saying
or vice
it's the same
versa.
root. I'm saying that that there are times in the Tanakh, and I could bring up those verses where the word Yoreach is used instead of Chodesh, and the word Yoreach means the
In
moon.
Tanakh, but not in
Okay.
Torah.
Right, in Tanakh, but we're using the Tanakh to elucidate. We're using the Tanakh to elucidate what the Torah is saying, but we don't even need to use the Tanakh to elucidate what the Torah is saying.
Or that what the judges ruled.
Let me finish, because I feel like I'm
Sure.
I'm being shut out here. Okay, the point is that the Tanakh, because it is the literature of ancient Israel before the rabbis came on the scene and before other foreign philosophies came on the scene, we can use it as a way to understand how ancient Israelites understood and lived the laws of the Torah. I'm in no way, shape, or form, and I haven't been at any time in this discussion / debate implying that the rest of the Tanakh comes along and lays down new laws. I'm saying we can use it as a means to understand ancient biblical Hebrew, and we could use it, as a way to understand how, on a day-to-day basis, or on a year-to-year basis, or on a century-to-century basis, the ancient Israelites lived and understood the original 5 books, the laws of the Torah, what their culture was, what their language was, and what their understanding of their contract with God was, meaning the contract of the Torah, the Brit, the Brit of the Torah. Okay, getting back once again, I'll make the point again. We do not need any kind of consensus of a panel of judges to determine that the word Chodesh means the new month, or I'm sorry, the new moon, and that the word Chodesh means month. Because if you're going to say that we need a panel of judges to wait, let me finish, please. If we're going to need a panel of judges to determine that, then we would need a panel of judges to determine what any and every word in the entire Torah or in the entire Tanakh means. Okay. Let's go grab a drink of water here.
Here, can you give me your interpretation then?
No, wait.
Okay.
There are ways that we, that scholars in general, or just even the average person, can pick up foreign languages or ancient languages and make sense of them. And part of that perhaps relies on what we might call tradition, what might be an actual, I hate to use the word oral law, but some kind of tradition passed down through the generations. Okay. But it relies on other things as well. Wait a second. Let me finish, please. It relies on other things as well. Okay, such as analysis of the word itself, the root or the shorish of the word, such as analysis of how the word is used within the Torah, within the Tanakh, within other languages that were related to Hebrew, such as ancient Canaanite languages, Ugaritic, for instance, and Akkadian, Aramaic, etc. We could see how we have ways of determining what these words mean, and we also do. Okay, so all right. The point is, we don't need a tribunal of judges. Wait a second, let me just finish. We don't need any kind of tribunal of judges to come along and say that the word Chodesh means the new moon. Okay, that's my point.
Can you give me an example on how you would interpret, from a practical perspective, the verse you said that is just explaining what appears in Deuteronomy chapter 17, which is 2 Chronicles 18, verse 10? Like, give me an example of what ben Torah le mitzvah in terms of adjudication, all right, and explanation. Hukim and mishpatim. If this is the role of the judges, right, not just one individual judge, but judges, the heads of Israel, okay, can you give me an example found in Tanakh or some verifiable like source on how that actually looked like if it wasn't based off of consensus?
Yeah, this phrase, mitzvot and chukim and mishpatim, this is a phrase that we find many times throughout the Tanakh and
Torah le mitzvah. Torah le mitzvah.
Wait, what's that?
It says first, Torah le mitzvah, le chukim ule mishpatim. You know, so give me an example of one law that we have that in some way has the Sanhedrin or the judges, the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, written all over it. Like, can you concede to at least one or two laws?
It doesn't have any kind of Sanhedrin or Anshe Knesset Gedolah written over it at all. The verses mean Torah means instruction. Okay. Yeah. So instruction le means regarding or towards. So instruction on mitzvah.
Right. Okay. The mitzvot and like Rosh Chodesh. Right.
But judgments.
Yes. Okay.
No, not at all.
Okay. It says le mitzvah. No, the command. It says, how do you keep the mitzvot in the Torah? Can you give me an example? Like, are you gonna like concede that the judges had a role in establishing or formulating any form of Jewish law? Because here it says they did. Can you give me one that you would
It
concede
doesn't say
has
that.
a Sanhedrin written
It
all
doesn't
over
say
it?
that.
But it
It
specifically
doesn't
says
say that at all.
what?
It's
Okay, so I'm going to read it in the English.
it doesn't
I mean,
say
just
that.
for
No. But let me respond.
no, but he
you're
clearly
hogging
says
my.
that.
It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that at all. Okay.
Okay,
You
so
can
what
read
does that
it in the
mean? I mean,
English,
give
but
me an
that's not
example of what this
Can I
means.
explain what it's saying? Wait, Asher,
Okay,
can I please
sure.
explain what it's saying
Okay, go
first,
ahead.
and then you can respond? Okay. The phrase mitzvah, chukim, mishpatim. This is a phrase we find many times in the Tanakh and even in the Torah. This is the way biblical Hebrew works. Okay, biblical Hebrew.
Mhm.
What it does is it what's the word I'm looking for? It elaborates or emphasizes by using repetition. Okay, in this sometimes it'll use explicit repetition. So, for instance, Shabbat Shabbaton. That's not exactly explicit repetition, but close enough. In this case, what it's doing, it's using something called parallel repetition. In other words, this is not speak what these words are saying. Okay, this phrase mitzvah, chukim, or limitzvah, the chukim, the mishpatim. It's the Torah's way, or it's biblical Hebrew's way of emphasizing through repetition. We see this a lot in the Torah. This is the way biblical Hebrew works. Okay, so this phrase, which we see many times, the mitzvot and the chukim and the mishpatim, is a phrase which means all of the things that need to be adjudicated. Okay, we could find this phrase, as I said, in many other places in the Torah as well. Okay, these three words together. Okay, so what this is really saying, first I'll read it. I can read it literally. So for the instruction regarding commandments, regarding statutes, regarding judgments, but what it's really saying is anything, right? And that's elaborated by what we see earlier in that verse. Okay, which is it says ben dam lebdam, which is picking up once again on Deuteronomy 17:9, almost word for word. Okay, where it says, Deuteronomy 17:8, where it says, dam ledam, din ledin, nega lenega, divrei rivot b'sha'arecha. Okay, so the Torah works through, the biblical Hebrew works through repetition. Repetition means emphasis. I give a regular Torah studies, and I think almost every Torah study that I give, I always make this point. Anyone who listens to my Torah studies knows that I think in almost every Torah study, repetition means emphasis. What 2 Chronicles 19 is trying to say is it's using the literary mechanism of repetition. In this case, parallel repetition, meaning it's not exactly the same word. It's not saying le mitzvah, the mitzvah, which you will see that kind of repetition, actual repetition, very commonly throughout the Torah. But in this time,
you're not answering my question.
I'm answering your question.
No.
I'm answering your question.
Give me an example. You give me an example of ben Torah le mitzvah.
Let me finish. Let me finish.
Okay. You're speaking a lot more than I am.
This is a literary device. I'll finish in 1 second. This is a literary device. The words le mitzvah, le chukim, le mishpatim is a literary device to use repetition to say that any problem that comes up between fellow Israelites within the land of Israel, and it can't be solved within the gates, which it says later on in verse 11, in the following verse, okay, should be brought to the judge or one of the Kohanim that's sitting in wherever the tabernacle and later the temple was. That's all it's saying. Right. It's a fun. I don't want to. I don't want you.
And later it's called Torah.
By saying this. Let me just sum it up by saying this. Okay. I don't mean in any way to belittle or insult, but it comes from. I'm sorry to say it this way. It comes from a fundamental lack of the way biblical Hebrew works and the literary mechanisms that biblical Hebrew uses to get across its points. And repetition is one of those main literary devices. Repetition means emphasis.
Okay. So
all right, that's my response.
Okay. So if this is explaining Deuteronomy 17, Deuteronomy 17 tells you that they will give you the verdict. They will give you the mishpat. They will give you the law. I just asked for an example because here it clearly says that their whole adjudication is based between ben Torah le mitzvah, le chukim le mishpatim, what we know as Jewish law. I understand that the Karaite position is not to give any leeway to the notion of consensus of the Sanhedrin. amongst Israel. Can you give me an example of what this means throughout Jewish history? What law was modified? What law can we say that this possibly came from the Sanhedrin? Are you willing to concede that anything came from the Sanhedrin, right? When it specifically says here, as an explanation of Parashat Shoftim, that they're responsible for telling us how to understand essentially Torah laws, mitzvahs, hukim, mishpatim, laws between man and man. I mean, I'm clearly like a modernist. I'm sorry, a modern interpretation. Mitzvot ben adam lechavero, mitzvom, but like mitzvot, the mitzvot ben adam lemakom. Hold on 1 second. Here, my keyboard went crazy. Can you give me an example? Like, can you give me an example of where you would concede that this has the Sanhedrin, any law, any practice, has the Sanhedrin written all over it, when it encompasses mitzvot ben adam lechavero again and mitzvot ben adam lemakom? Well, I mean, you're not even giving an inch.
When the Sanhedrin. No, I'm not giving an inch. The Sanhedrin is a later institution that was instituted by the Romans, by the Roman governor. He set up 5 Sanhedria around the land of Israel to give the Jews some kind of a certain modicum of autonomous rules of self-rule, with the understanding that the Jews can do whatever the heck they want as long as they don't revolt against us, the Romans. No, I give absolutely no leeway whatsoever. That's not the way we see it in ancient Israel. I'll throw the question back on you. Can you find an actual case? We have 24 books of the Tanakh minus 5, the actual Chumash itself. So let's take those away. Or you can use those if you want. In the 19 other books of the Nach, can you find a single case where you see adjudication by tribunal? I can't think of one. If you can, please.
I mean, in other
words, by consensus.
Okay.
By consensus.
I just gave you
the most case where it says that such and such case was judged by consensus.
I just gave you the clearest one, which is Rosh Chodesh. Essentially, any practice.
No, you didn't.
Hold on. Just let me. Okay. So any practice that happens to appear in Nach that doesn't appear in the Chumash, that happens to appear amongst Klal Yisrael that doesn't appear in the Chumash, we understand unless it came through this tribunal, it would be adding to the Torah, right? They're not being a Baal Tosef, right? The Torah is clear. Lo Tosef alav velo tigor memenu. When they rule something into existence, it has to be rabbinic. That's the big distinction between what Karaites claim that we believe in, that we're actually adding to the Torah. We're not adding to the Torah, okay? We're actually following the Torah, trusting a bunch of men who make mistakes, right? Because the Torah believes in structure and progress, right? Never adding to the actual Torah, always making a distinction. If you read the Talmud straight through, how many times do these rabbis go out of their way to say this is from the Torah, this is from the rabbis? Sometimes where they may mess up, like sometimes they may blur the line,
lie.
But to assume
they
lie. Hold on. They're human beings. Okay. But to assume that Israel could in some way be on the same page, progress as a nation, with everyone walking around with the Chumash under their arm saying, I'm going to slaughter like this, I'm going to establish the month like this. That's more of a leap than to assume
that. Nobody's saying that.
Well, I mean, you're using
nobody's saying that at all.
So
nobody's saying that at all. In fact, one of the complaints of Israel, for instance, when they at the end of the book of Shoftim, at the end of the book of Judges, when you have the whole incident with the tribe of Benjamin almost being wiped out, is that the nation of Israel says we want a king. Why do we want a king? Because we see that everyone is doing that which is right in their own eyes. Right? There was that problem. They wanted some kind of centralization, but the centralization is not in some kind of body of tribunal that comes along and then integrates foreign philosophies. Again, I gave you the examples of Persian or Zoroastrian philosophy, Greek philosophy, later on Roman philosophy. Integrates that into the nation of Israel, into their interpretation and practical halakha, if you want to call it that, and then comes along and says, well, this is now the new consensus. This is exactly what I disagree with and what I reject as a Karaite. We see how the nation of Israel kept the Torah for 1,000 years. We don't need a tribunal to come along and make fundamental changes to that. And
do you believe in the notion of the Messiah?
And call it progress, or wait, let me just finish. And call it progress or development, or say that we need some kind of consensus. We need a consensus, but we need a consensus under actual Torah. We can point once again. If we want to take a verse, wait, let me finish, please. If we want to take a verse, then we can go to Exodus. Oh, where is it? I believe it's Exodus 21, if I'm not mistaken, or 22. I'll just find it for 1 second. Okay. Exodus 22, I believe it is, if my memory serves me correctly. Let's see.
Let me chime in. I think that we need to have equal talking space.
It doesn't matter. Anyway, where it says, you do not follow after the majority to do wrong. Okay. In ancient Israel, we had a very small, we had a large majority of the nation. We had a large majority of the nation that turned to idol worship, that turned to idolatry, that turned to murder, that turned to all kinds of spilling of blood. This is what the prophets, the major and the minor prophets, this is what they cry out about. And yet that doesn't mean that now forms the consensus. Consensus is not the way that the nation of Israel works, according to the Torah. Wait, let me just finish. According to the Torah, what do they say about the democracy? Democracy is 5 wolves and 4 sheep voting on what's for dinner, right? Consensus is not truth. Consensus is not. Wait. Let me finish, please. Consensus
it's order and it's necessary.
Is not. It's not order and it's not necessary. Look at the situation in the United States right now, where there's supposedly democracy. Is that order? It's far from order. It's an insane asylum over there right now. It's just back there for a while, and I felt it and saw it with my own eyes.
Anarchy.
The alternative, according. No,
I mean, it's biblical anarchy, which you're advocating for. All right, so let me respond.
I'm not advocating that at all. I'm not advocating that at all. But first of all, what needs to be done? Wait. Let me finish though. Okay, what needs to be done at this point in time, when there aren't prophets, when there aren't Kohanim and Levites serving, when there isn't a king, when there isn't all of the structures that were set up in the Torah? That's another discussion. We can have a side discussion. Okay, that's like saying, okay, I'm supposed to get from point A to point B, but I ran out of gas in the middle. What do we do now? It's a less than perfect situation. That's a side discussion. But what I do want to establish is that first and foremost, we have to understand the vision that the Torah lays down, that God lays down through the Torah, as to how the nation of Israel is. You have to
let me talk. I'm just saying it's like
I will. I've let you talk. I've let you talk a lot. Let me just finish this one point, and then I'll turn it over to you. It is not a rule by consensus. It is not a democracy. It is not a Sanhedrin, which means a tribunal sitting together. It is a top-down hierarchical running of the nation, starting with God at the top, next with the head judge, which then was bifurcated into the king and the prophet. Well, we'll say the king, and then below it you have the judges in the cities, the local judges. That's the way that the nation of Israel was meant to be run, and that's the way cases were meant to be adjudicated. And we don't see any elements of that in rabbinical Judaism. We don't see any elements of that when we talk about a Sanhedrin. All of those distinctions are lost and gone. What my goal or my dream as a Karaite is to
you have to land this plane.
The way that the nation of Israel understood or kept the true Torah, which is to have the Levites in place, the Kohanim in place, a king from the line of David, a descendant from the king of David in place on the throne, to have judges in place in the local cities, to have a head judge, which would be the king at that point, sitting in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, and to have prophets and so on and so forth, to have heads of tribes, heads of families, heads of houses of fathers.
You have to land this plane. I mean, this has to be a dialogue. I mean, you're just kind of filibustering at this point.
I'm sorry. Maybe I filibustered. Go ahead.
Okay, fine. So let me present my understanding of the oral law as it's practically understood in Orthodox Judaism today, at least by academics, right?
Mm-hmm.
The individuals that appear in the Mishnah are individuals that have something. Of course, we believe this in faith, like most things, like in the Jewish world, we can't actually prove it. We believe that they have something called smicha going back to Moses. That means the notion was backed up. It didn't just come out of nowhere. That it was passed down, just like God put on the 70 elders what he put on Moses, what Moses essentially put in Yehoshua. It was passed down from teacher to student. And these were individuals that we call Tanayim. And before, the Zugot, even like the members of the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, the Rambam includes even the prophets.
Which didn't exist, by the way, but okay, fair enough.
Okay, fine. You know, I disagree with this. I do believe it existed. Well, I mean, these individuals.
Like you said, you have faith. Your faith is very strong. I'll give you that.
Okay. But, like,
I could praise
if you want to include Joseph, okay. What's the Josephus even mentions the Sanhedrin and their authority. Even the New Testament mentions the Sanhedrin and their authority. People understood that these individuals had authority going back.
At the time of Josephus. They had authority at the time of Jesus of Nazareth. Of course they did. He's talking real politics.
So like from a historical, non-Orthodox perspective, we acknowledge that this court had authority. Even Jesus, right? And I don't believe in Jesus in any way. I think he was a decent person. But like specifically says,
okay, just making that
like
clear.
in the book of okay, that was specifically says in the book of Matthew, right? That these individuals, that these guys, they sat in the seat of Moses. They understood that the authority of the court back then was an extension of that given to Moses. It wasn't a new idea. The idea of consensus always existed. Now, what the rabbis are telling you is that the Mishnah, the rabbis that appear in the Mishnah, were those who sat on one of the last Sanhedrin out there. Now, granted, forget about the term Sanhedrin. If you like the word Beit Din Hagadol, Zakanim, Shoftim, whatever, okay, the notion of consensus extended from Deuteronomy chapter 17, all right, reiterated in 2 Chronicles chapter, I believe this was 18, and even enters Philo-Judaeus, Josephus, the New Testament. And you know what? Every academic source never has anything negative to say about the members of the Sanhedrin. We understand that the priesthood became corrupted, right? The other leaders became corrupted. There is no academic source, historical source, that ever said that the Sanhedrin became corrupted. The verse that you use, that we should not follow the majority of evil. Hold on.
Can I bring you a source?
Wait, hold on. You could.
Then I'll bring you a source.
Okay, yes, wait, hold on. The same verse that you mentioned, I believe it might be in like in Exodus chapter 23. It says, "Don't follow the majority to do evil," is understood by the rabbis in the Mishnah to say that this means that you follow essentially the consensus to do good, right? That doesn't mean that we follow intuition. So the idea that you're gonna dismiss even any of my questions when I tell you to give me an example, when even Tanakh is reiterating Deuteronomy, like chapter 17, that the keeping of mitzvot, the understanding of mitzvot, okay, was incumbent on the opinion of these judges. You wouldn't even concede that they did anything, because you're married to this notion of an anarchy-style Judaism, that everyone in some way walked down with the Bible under their arm, deciphering every form of ceremonial law for themselves.
You're putting words in.
Hold on.
You're putting words and thoughts into.
I mean, you didn't answer my question, okay, because you didn't answer my question, I have no other choice than to assume like what you would answer. So we believe that Karaites are essentially ingrates, from a respectful, I mean, I'm not trying to be rude, okay, but the idea that you can't even pay tribute.
Go for it, man. I've heard a lot worse than that. I believe.
Well, I mean, I'm not trying I'm really trying not to disrespect you. But the reason, I think that it's an example of ingratitude is because they are benefiting off the universal understanding, practical understanding of at least Torah law laid down by our sages, and that includes the prophets and the kings. But to assume that we could have got where we are today by mainly just having a chumash under arm is a bit absurd. Okay, and when granted that you won't even acknowledge that it's a man-made court. Right? When here it specifically says that they're in some way deciphering, explaining mitzvot, hukim, mishpatim, you won't even give them that, because
they're adjudicating cases.
It's an attempt to disorganize religion. It's essentially an attempt to disorganize religion. Well, it says between mitzvot, between hukim, mishpatim. I mean, even in this, you won't give them. Why? Because I guess you don't have an example.
That's a phrase. That's a phrase.
I mean, is it used elsewhere? Okay, but is it used elsewhere?
It's a phrase that appears many times, and it always means. It always means lirabot. It always means.
This is the only time in Tanakh that it mentions judges. Okay, like in some way here to interpret mitzvot and hukim and mishatim. This is the only case, for you to compare it to something else. It just doesn't exist. Okay, the only thing you can compare it to is Deuteronomy chapter 17. If you don't have an example of this, then you know what? Say, I don't believe that they had any authority.
I could bring up all the cases where where all of those words are used together, but it would take a long time. That phrase is often used many times throughout the Tanakh, throughout the Torah, and throughout the Tanakh.
No.
Those are often grouped together. Mishpatim and chukim and mitzvot and these are.
That's our whole legal system. That's our whole legal system, and it seems that the Sanhedrin or these judges had influence on how that was kept. That's it. I mean, it's not a big leap to conclude this. It's a bigger leap to assume that anarchy, all right, self-interpretation, which is never endorsed in the Torah, with the notion of people interpreting ceremonial law on themselves, or by themselves is never endorsed in the Torah. Okay, it's always the collective and those who speak in behalf of that collective. That's it, which is clearly this ruling body.
Okay, I hear your opinion. I strongly disagree with it. Let's talk about the ruling body for a second. If I could, again, I'll save us the trouble of going into the Hebrew. But let's look at Ezekiel chapter 8. I'll start in verse 9 just to get a little bit of context. You can bring it up if you want. And he said to me, meaning God said to Ezekiel, to Yechezkel, go in and see the wicked and detestable things they are doing here. So I went in and looked, and I saw portrayed all over the walls, talking about the walls of the temple or the temple courtyard, all kinds of crawling things and unclean animals and all the idols of Israel. In front of them stood the 70 elders of Israel, and Jaazaniah, son of Shaphan, was standing among them. Each of the 70 elders of Israel had a censer in his hand. What do you think they were doing with these censer, C-E-N-S-E-R, what you call it, incense pan? And a fragrant cloud of incense was rising. Verse 12 is Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 12. God said to me, son of man, have you seen what the elders of Israel are doing in the darkness, each at the shrine of his own idol? They say, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. Again, he said, you will see them doing things that are even more detestable. And then it goes on and it speaks about how the Israelites were, the Zkenim, the elders were worshiping the god of Tammuz, and on. And Ezekiel goes on with all these atrocities that Israel, including the elders, were committing at this time. So before we talk about a body of a court or a body or tribunal that we can rely on them to form a consensus, let's consider what Ezekiel is saying here in chapter 8. Okay, consensus.
I think you ignored my question.
Okay.
I said that there is no academic source, historical source, not biblical. We know that we were put into exile because not just the people, but the leadership became corrupted. There's no academic source, right? Like Josephus, like Philo-Judaeus that specifically said that the ruling body, the court, became corrupted. That was my claim.
Josephus was a Pharisee originally, and he was Pharisaic leaning even after he became a Roman historian. Philo Bechlal was his name is Greek, and he essentially tried to establish some kind of he essentially tried to establish some kind of rationalistic Greek-styled Judaism, where in Egypt, because Hellenism had already spread to Egypt where he lived at the time. So those are not very good examples.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a good example. Because what does rabbinic Judaism have to do with the Pharisees?
What does rabbinical Judaism have to do with the Pharisees? Yeah. Oh, we're going to go in that direction?
Yeah, no, is there a rabbinic...
Judaism is a continuation of Pharisaic Judaism.
Do you have proof for that? Is there anywhere in the Talmud that you find a rabbi ever identifying himself as a Pharisee?
I don't know, but it
does not exist. It does not exist. Here, the example I give is like there's a big tsunami nowadays, and okay, all right. So no, I'm just saying it's because I'm sure there are Christians listening.
That's fine.
Like,
fair enough.
Well, I'm sure there are Christians listening in some way cringing like away from rabbinic Judaism because they think they're an extension of the Pharisees. Okay, even the Sadducees believed in what we call rabbinic Judaism today because it's tied to the Sanhedrin.
Pharisees.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's a matter of semantics, but okay, we'll go with that. I don't think there's. I think we would be just going down a rabbit hole if we go in that direction. Fine. So I won't use the word the Pharisees. I'll use the word the rabbis.
Right. So my point stands that there's no academic source that spoke about the Sanhedrin becoming corrupted like the priesthood. The priesthood, absolutely. Okay. Onanias and all these individuals, they sold themselves out and later on to Rome, as a matter of fact. But the idea of the court not being able to be trusted on, I mean, like we're clearly not talking about in the time of Jeremiah, which I think this just lays down my premise that there was a court. They had scepters in their hand. They were ruling. Like it didn't say one individual. Like you're saying,
who did they steal the scepters from? I'm curious.
No. All right, so the scepter is the notion of authority.
I have a scepter right back there.
No, okay, so that's fine. But Right, and you even
If I
concluded
grab
that.
my scepter and go
Hold
up to
on.
the Temple Mount next Tuesday or Wednesday, are you gonna listen to my?
I'm trying to make you
my interpretation
I'm
of
trying
Torah
to
law?
understand your statement
No,
because
I
you
mean,
said
it's not a scepter in the
that the
hand.
ruling
Okay.
body that was limited to the shofet, one individual. I mean, here in your Tanakh, it specifically talks about shoftim, right? So, I mean, in Second Chronicles, it talks about shoftim.
Yes.
So then,
Of
I
course
mean,
it
are you
talks
in
about
some way
shoftim.
taking that statement
There was
back?
a shofet. There was a shofet in the city, and then there was in each of the cities, b'sharecha, on your gates. It's Deuteronomy 17:9, and then there was a head shofet in
so you believe in judges then?
In where the tabernacle / temple was. We're
Okay,
going in circles at this point.
Well,
yeah.
I'm just trying to clarify your initial statements. So, Orthodox Judaism or rabbinical style Judaism understands that this shofet is personified in the notion of the nasi, which is fine. All right. I mean, I don't think it changes anything, but there was a whole ruling body beneath them that weren't just there to adjudicate cases between blood and blood. Okay, because again, you're not giving any example of what Tanakh specifically says they were doing, which is interpreting mitzvot.
There's no example of such a thing in the Tanakh.
Okay,
not that I can find.
I think the only reasonable conclusion. I think the only reasonable conclusion is any time something appears in Tanakh that does not appear in the Torah, right? That means it was a development of the judges, right? I mean, someone could conclude that in a reasonable manner.
We don't see we don't see any examples where judges come along and make new laws. They may make for instance,
Second Chronicles explains this. Okay, so in terms of not buying or selling on the Sabbath, for example, right? I mean, nowhere in the Torah does it say that you can't buy or sell on the Sabbath, although it appears in the book of Amos. Right? Okay, so
I don't think it says buying and selling. It might. Let's look at it.
Okay,
I think it says selling, but okay.
Selling, fine. Okay, I mean, monetary transactions.
Buying and selling.
Okay, what? I'm sorry.
I personally.
Okay, fine.
I mean,
financial transactions on the Sabbath. Okay, so you would have to believe that they're adding to the Torah restrictions, or the judges themselves were in some way trying to explain hukim lemishpatim. Right?
They're not trying to explain. They're saying what the way that Israel understood, the way that the law already happened.
But there had to be a consensus for them to conclude that. There had to be a consensus. You understand that Israel, if every Israeli, right, and we're not the most agreeable people,
but it's a consensus based on a top-down hierarchy, not based on a tribunal. That's what I've been trying to say.
Okay, well, you believe that in faith.
Moses,
it's quite hard to run a country like that. I'll tell you that.
No, it's quite easy. I think China is doing a lot better than the United States. They have consensus because Xi Jinping lays down the law.
The members of the Communist Party.
They have a $1 trillion, multi-trillion-dollar surplus with the rest of the world. So they must be doing something right.
Right.
I personally don't believe in democracy. I think democracy is not appropriate for the nation of Israel, and it's certainly not appropriate for the nation of Israel under a Torah configuration.
Anarchy isn't either. No, in terms of imagine every Israeli trying to determine the Israeli constitution the way he or she sees fit. We're not the most agreeable people. It would look ridiculous.
Then we get back to real politics about how the fact of the matter is we don't have a temple right now. We don't have prophets right now. We don't have Kohanim right now. Levites. We don't have a descendant of King David on the throne. So now what do we do? In the meantime, that's another discussion, but I don't think that's what we're discussing here.
No, I think that when God says that He's going to redeem us,
we need for now. I don't know, but that's
if we believe in a redemption, that we can assume that He's going to redeem us in a uniform manner. If for some reason you, like in Eretz Yisrael, decided to determine the month in a different way, or do something that does not appear in the Torah in a different way, how could we be keeping Torah in the same manner? How could we be redeemed? So clearly, there's no Sanhedrin nowadays. Right? I'm not even sure how we can reestablish the Sanhedrin. The Rambam gives his opinion. He says, Neri li, if you do this and that. Okay. The only way we could keep mitzvot in the same manner is by relying on the consensus that at least appears in the Mishnah for the sake of order, but you wouldn't even extend that much. Right? Okay, well, I mean, I understand, but I think that you're hurting the Jewish people. If more people thought like you, we would have absolutely no religious ceremonial consensus at all.
And I would say that if more people felt like me, we would finally throw off this 2,000-year scourge of rabbinical Judaism, and we as a nation would return to the true Torah. The fact of the matter is, if you look around the nation of Israel, here in Israel and around the Jewish world, most people want nothing to do with the rabbis and their Mishnah and their Talmud.
Because they're not religious.
And their laws. No, I know what you're about to say, but but it's not true. The reason, in my opinion, that they don't want nothing to do with it is because, and I think actually Rav Kook, this is one of his main ideas, that the Torah of the Galut does not contain the souls of the return of the nation of Israel to the land of Israel. We're something greater now. When God turns his face towards us and ingathers us from the four corners of the earth, we become something greater than we were in the Galut and this rabbinical Judaism, which is essentially a product of the Galut, a product of exile and conquering by foreign nations, just does not hold up for the in the intuitive and the basic visceral soul notions of most Israelis, and that's why they reject it, and that's why they go that's why they become Chilonim, meaning non-religious Jews, or they go to Thailand, they go to Buddhism, and they go to Hinduism, because they don't want anything to do with rabbinical Judaism. 80 to 90% of the nation, whatever the amount, the number is, want little to nothing to do with rabbinical Judaism.
Well, they want little or nothing to do with religion in general.
Not because they're rebellious, and not because they hate God, and not because they hate Torah, because they have no idea what it is, because it's been distorted by
is it just a coincidence?
That's my
is it just a coincidence that one of the first things Rav Kook did was establish the Rabbanut even before the state? And he was attacked by the rabbis because his goal, hold on, his goal was to reestablish the Sanhedrin.
I know.
Even the notion of 70 elders. So Rav Kook knew that you could not
lead. I'm not a Rav Kook guy. I'm just giving an example.
No, that's fine. Yeah, but even Rav Kook understood that you couldn't lead a religious nation without consensus in their religious leaders. So fine, there you go. I mean, I think there's really nothing else for us to speak about. We're just speaking going in circles.
I think so.
We have irreconcilable differences in this case.
Jump the shark, as they say. We're just going in circles now. But why don't we? I have an idea, Asher. Why don't we each give kind of closing statements without interruption? 5 minutes each, if that works for you.
Oh no, 5 minutes is way too much.
Okay, 3 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, it's fine. 3 minutes is fine.
2 minutes. Okay. Fine.
2 minutes is fine. Go ahead. Okay. Well, anyways.
You want me to go first?
Well, I could go first.
All right. Go ahead.
My premise here is not in any way to deify the words of the rabbis of today, for sure, not of today, or even the ones in the Mishnah, just to speak about the necessity of it and how their claim actually has legs, right? It has a source. And that source is the Torah. I understand that the average Karaite or irreligious or anti-rabbinic Jew will tell you that they made it up from thin air. I'm telling you that Maimonides, as well as many of the Gaonim, they're saying the exact thing I'm saying now, that the Torah requires consensus, and it gave us the body, the structure where that consensus was supposed to come from. And that's what was later called the Sanhedrin. Now, it had many different names throughout Jewish history, emphasizing the notion of a court. That's it. Pure man-made laws that even themselves were sometimes erroneous. In the Talmud, like I mentioned before, Masechet Harayot talks about, also in the Rambam, like Hilchot Shegagot, the errors of this court. They make mistakes. Oops, we made a mistake. Depending on how many people followed that specific ruling, they even had to bring a korban. Okay, if people can't see the practical utilitarian use for that, all right, I think it's something in that person that wants to disorganize religion. And some people just have that essentially like a taiva, just to in some way not to be told what to do, thinking, modern day groups like Antifa or anarchy movements just essentially want to disrupt because they don't want to be guided by force in any specific way. However, it would be impossible for us to keep the Sabbath, to establish months. 90% of what's enjoyed by even Karaite Jews today needed consensus. The Karaite Jews in Eretz Yisrael go by a book called the Sevel HaYerusha, the Yoke of Our Inheritance, which is a book of traditions, right? Everybody knows Karaites in Israel don't eat shawarma. Why not? because the elders, the Chachamim, concluded this X, Y, and Z. We can do that in the Karaite movement, but we can't even pay tribute to those who claim to come from the Sanhedrin that predated Karaite Judaism, by at least 1,000 years, right? It just seems a little absurd, and it seems that Karaite Judaism before the Maimonidean or the understanding of the Gaonim could have tolerated, or could have kept on peddling this idea. But after the fact, after we explained that this is not an attempt to hijack Judaism, but to make it livable, not just in biblical, ancient Israel, but even in the exile. It's there to keep us on the same page. So the bigger war are people who actually try to hijack Judaism and say that you can't understand the Torah at all without the oral law, which is not what I believe. Okay, every ethical portion of the Torah could be understood plainly. However, every ceremonial law cries out for consensus. Let's keep this all in the same manner, and that is quite impossible without a Sanhedrin.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, I'll give my concluding statement. So, in opposition to what Asher said, I do not believe in anarchy in Torah and in the nation of Israel. Quite the opposite. I believe there should be an order, a very clear order, but I believe that order should be determined and dictated by the vision of the Torah. The vision of the Torah speaks about the reestablishment of the Kohanim and the Levites serving in the temple, speaks about a descendant of David sitting on the throne, speaks about a hierarchy of individual judges, the judges in the cities, in your gates, and the head judge, the so-called head of the Supreme Court, which is a body of one, sitting in Jerusalem or wherever the tabernacle/temple would be. So quite the contrary to believing in anarchy, I actually believe in order. And I would furthermore claim that the rabbinical conception of adjudicating cases and interpreting the Torah is a form of anarchy in the sense that it relies on the foreign methods, the foreign Greek methods of democracy and tribunal decision, whereas the Torah clearly lays out a vision for a hierarchical, top-down, starting with God, top-down understanding of the Torah and adjudication of cases between individuals within the nation of Israel. So that's one main point. Another main point that I guess I'll reiterate and I'll point out is that my objection to rabbinical Judaism is not only mysticism. It certainly is the mystical elements of that appeared in Judaism, mostly in the Middle Ages, in as I mentioned, the Iberian Peninsula, in the 10th, 11th centuries approximately. But it is very much against rationalism. Maimonides himself lived in that atmosphere, in that milieu. He comes from that same seed. He comes from that same fabric, that same cloth. He was born, if I'm not mistaken, in Granada, I believe, Cordoba, Spain. Eventually made his way to Fez, Morocco. Actually visited the place where he had a yeshiva there and lived in Fez. Recommend visiting it. And then eventually made his way to Egypt, right? But he comes from that same. He's cut from that same cloth that mysticism is, and so he's like so many people who, when they are against something, they're actually giving credence to the thing that they're against. His anti-mysticism / rationalist / Neoplatonism take on the Torah is essentially, in my opinion, it's a means of dressing up an irrational view of the Torah, meaning the rabbinical quote unquote oral law, in rational garments, and so it's a work of apologetics essentially. It tries to make sense out of something. It tries to develop a logical and self-consistent, coherent system out of something which is not logical, which is not self-contained, or which is not coherent, and which doesn't make sense. So that's my second point. And my third point is that the nation of Israel lived for 1,000 years with little changes to its understanding, interpretation, and day-to-day keeping of the laws of the Torah. They didn't need any kind of tribunal. They didn't need any type of body of scholars to come along and tell them how to keep the Torah. There are examples, for instance, later in the book of Nehemiah and Ezra, where you have the people, you have a bunch of people explaining the Torah to the people. That's because they had just come back. Many of them had just come back from Babylon, and they'd lost their knowledge of biblical Hebrew, and they needed someone to explain to them. That's only in the latest books of the Torah, when already after the exile. Before the exile, what the Torah was trying to say was consistent and clear to the entire nation of Israel. Whether the majority of Israel decided to follow it or not is another story. We see many examples where they don't, but it was consistent and clear, and it doesn't change really from the initial books of the Tanakh until the latest books of the Tanakh. So therefore, when we see later on, when the Pharisees, or I guess the rabbis, come along and they make all of these wide-ranging changes, they make all of these deviations, which they'll call innovations or development or advancement of Judaism. In my opinion, as a Karaite, they are not advancing or innovating. What they're doing is deviating from the Torah and creating essentially a derivative religion. As a good friend of mine always likes to say, I'll quote him, I won't mention his name, he's kind of a shy and private guy, but he always says that Islam is to Muhammad as Christianity is to the New Testament, as rabbinical Judaism is to the Talmud. It's a matter of faith and not a matter of logic. It's a matter of hope and desires, rather than a matter of actually examining the text, the only text that ultimately belongs to our nation from the time that our nation existed as a nation in ancient times, and that is the Tanakh. So Asher mentioned a number of times about faith and about having faith in the Mishnah, having faith in the Sanhedrin. And again, I would say that exactly explains it. Just as a Christian has faith in the New Testament, just as a Muslim has faith that Muhammad was a prophet and transmitted the Quran through the prophet Gabriel, so the rabbinical Jew has faith, but not actual proof, that the Mishnah, the Talmud, and all of the other quote-unquote innovations of rabbinical Judaism are harkened back to earlier times. And with that, I'll conclude.
Okay, great. Well, thank you.
All right,
thank you for having me.
Asher, it's been interesting, and I appreciate you joining us here. I'll make sure you get all the links so that you can post it wherever you want. And yeah, we'll stay in contact, huh?
Okay, thank you. All right, be well. Bye.
All right. Shalom, shalom. Be well.
Mika האדמות.
Quando il re Nimrod al capo salía, vino en el cielo y en la estrellería, y el ídolo santa en la judería, que había de nacer Abraham Avinu. Abraham Avinu, padre querido, padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, padre querido, padre bendito, luz de Israel.
La mujer de Terra ordenada, día en día ella preguntaba, ¿qué tiene la cara tan demonada? Ella ya sabía el bien que tenía.
Abraham Avinu, padre querido, padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, padre querido, padre bendito, luz de Israel. Los 9 meses pariquería, iba caminando por campos en viñas, y a su marido no le descubría, topó una mara y parería. Abraham Avinu, padre querido, padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, padre querido, padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, padre querido, padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, padre querido, padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avinu, padre querido, padre bendito, luz de Israel.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי. הזרים עם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים